Hello, Super Relaxed Fantasy Club. I'm Matthew Ward. I was due to be coming down to do a reading and a Q&A at the start of April, but a lot has happened since then, and obviously we're not going to be doing that. Hopefully again in person at some point, but we'll see what happens. In the meantime, I wanted to record a video, do the reading remotely, just as a way of tiding things over. I don't do many readings. In fact, this is my first reading, so just bear with me a little bit. If there's some slightly strange voices, a little bit of odd pauses, the odd bit of Garth Marenghi moments, please just bear with me and we'll keep going. But yes, today we will be doing a reading from Legacy of Ash, which is my Orbit debut, which is out in paperback on the 9th of April. Epic fantasy, 1 or 2 pages in it. Daring do, politics, scheming, intrigue, monsters, gods and magic. All of the stuff that hopefully you're looking for in an epic fantasy story. We're going to start a little bit further into the book than right at the beginning, because you don't want to hear a bit that's already available as a professional recording, or that you can hear a sample of on Audible or something like that. So we'll head in a little bit further and see where we get to. So, everyone sitting comfortably? Then let's get started. By unspoken accord, they settled on the alley between the Silverways dray yard and the warehouse behind. Far enough from the roadway's firestone lantern so as not to draw a constable's eye. Close enough that the low rush of the river weir rumbled beneath every word spoken. Rosa halted a pace or two into the alley. She set her shoulders against the wall and shooed the others along. Well, get this over with. Malachi cast a nervous eye towards the river. You heard her. I'd rather not get caught. Casimir shook his head. You're always so concerned about your reputation. I'm only here to stop you doing something foolish. Casimir offered a wry smile. Too late, and I'm not fighting for my reputation, but Colen's. Might be he even believed it, Malachi decided. Pride was a complicated burden, yet there was a rare lightness in Casimir's voice. Perhaps this was all about Colen. Malachi only hoped the young woman was grateful for the risks taken in her name. Malachi kept his thoughts to himself. His attention he spared for Aska's group deeper into the alley. 3 others accompanied her, 2 in the crimson-black surcoats of the Tower of Hearthguard, and 1 in plain-black garb. It struck Malachi as unfair that she brought so many, but that was the problem with such duels. The ritual had been born on distant battlefields and carried home by soldiers on leave. There were no rules, just a loose acceptance of what was to unfold. Casimir clapped him on the shoulder and set off down the alleyway. On reaching the midpoint, he spread his hands wide, sword still in its sheath. Right, how are we doing this? 3 touches, or will only blood shake an apology loose? Aska's only reply was a shriek of rage. Sword naked in her hand, she charged, boots thudding through refuse and horse dung. Malachi glanced at Rosa. She shrugged, eyes dark and thoughtful. Casimir stood arms outspread and sword scabbarded, seemingly frozen in place. At the last moment, he sidestepped. Aska's sword flashed past. A heartbeat later, so did Aska herself, further hastened by the heel of Casimir's boot against her rump. So you've no manners at all? Casimir asked. Care to try again? Aska snarled and hurled herself into another headlong charge. It ended much the same as the first. Casimir drew his sword and cut at the air in sweeping circles. Is this how your family fought at Zanya? No wonder they're not here to speak for themselves. Don't humiliate her, Casimir, muttered Malachi. It'll only make matters worse. Aska spat. You dare insult my family? Swords clashed, the blades locking. Aska twisted away. She struck again, trading high blows for a flurry of shallow cuts at Casimir's waist. He parried them all and thrust at Aska's belly. She stumbled back, breathing hard. You'll have to do better than that, mocked Casimir. Why, I crossed blades with Kaisaran himself less than a month ago. Aska feinted left, then thrust right. Casimir ignored the former and sidestepped the latter. All that strength, he continued, and he couldn't land a blow, sent him back to the border with his tail between his legs. Is that true? Malachi asked Rosa, his attention still on the duel. She snorted. Doubt it. The Hadari are too busy worrying over their dying emperor to make trouble. I'll bet Casimir Levin left his tent the whole time he was out there, much less cross swords with the emperor's son. The blades clashed again. Casimir, no longer content to defend, forced Aska into a series of unsteady parries. Even to Malachi's inexperienced eye there was a jarring difference to the 2 techniques. Casimir's arcs wove beautiful flashes of moonlight in the gloomy alley. Asker's responses were jerky and uneven. "This isn't right," Rosa muttered. "He's better than her, that's all," Malachi shrugged. "He's better than most people." "No," she said. "This is different. Mind and body are fighting one another." That was the trouble with Rosa. Sometimes she needed decoding. She's not trying to win. Or maybe she's stalling. The corner of Rosa's lip twitched. Or maybe it's something else. Malachi looked again, but if there was something deeper, he lacked the eye for it. But the expectation radiating from Asker's companions struck him as misplaced. Asker had no hope of winning. The only question was how far she'd push before capitulation. Unless... "The others," he murmured. "They're waiting for something. This is a distraction." Rosa frowned. "Find a patrol. I'll keep an eye on things." Malachi opened his mouth to protest, but closed it again as he realized the sense of her suggestion. He'd no use in a fight anyway. 4 shadows crowded the end of the alleyway, blotting out the weir behind and blocking hope of retreat. Too late, Malachi breathed. Rosa pushed off the wall. Her fingers drummed on the hilt of her sword. "Get behind me." She raised her voice. "This is a private matter." The shadows ignored her. Strides lengthened, bringing crimson and black surcoats closer, the leader outpacing his companions. "Stand down," he bellowed, drawing his sword. "No need for you to die as well." Rosa shook her head sadly. "Oh, my lad, you've no idea how much trouble you're in." "Suit yourself." The leader's sword flashed out. Rosa swept it aside. Her free hand closed around his throat. Her left heel hooked behind his ankle. His back struck the dung cobbles, a strangled cry ending in a huff of expelled air. Rosa slammed her boot down her boot and gazed sedately at a trio of Hearthguards who were a touch paler than they'd been before. "Who's next?" Malachi tore his attention back to the duel and cupped his hands to his mouth. "Casimir, you've been set up." "What?" Casimir glanced back over his shoulder. Good humour vanished. Asker seized on his distraction. With a cry of triumph, she thrust at his spine. Casimir spun around. He teased Asker's blade aside and struck it from her hand. A heartbeat later, he had her pinned against the warehouse wall. He had a generous handful of her expensive blouse bunched in his fingers and his sword at her throat. He spared a glance for her companions from the Silverway, now advancing along the alley with blades drawn. "Stay back." The foremost, a sallow man with a stubbled beard and a simple black guard, shrugged. "If Lady Terev dies, so do your friends." Rosa reached Malachi's side. Her blade dared the remaining newcomers to push their fortune. They hung back, content to wait, or ordered to do so. For the first time in many years, Malachi wished he had not abandoned the art of the sword. If nothing else, he should have been carrying a weapon. Sure, he'd only have gotten in the way, but that was better than being entirely useless. "You can't kill a councillor and 2 knights of the Republic," he said. "Not without consequences." "If there were witnesses, maybe," croaked Asker. "And it's not all of you who have to die," said the sallow man. "You can walk away." Malachi snorted. "You'd let us leave? Witnesses?" "It's your word against Lady Asker's. How much is your word worth, Lord Revect? Valuable enough to make a case Valuable enough to make a case for murder before the council?" Malachi scowled. Asker's father had too much influence for any such accusation to succeed. Asker would deny involvement. The violence would be dismissed as the work of opportunistic ne'er-do-wells. The sallow man was right. Malachi hated it, but he was right. 1 life or 3, and no justice for anyone. He felt sick and angrier than he had in years. Casimir growled in frustration. Letting his sword point dip to the cobbles, he released Asker. "Never known someone to go so much trouble to win a duel. You want to tell me why?" Asker mastered her throat and reclaimed her sword. "You already know why. My mother was 3 days dying from her wounds. My sister's body was never found. We'd nothing to bury. Her voice echoes through the family vault, but I can't give her peace. Kalen was a child when that happened. She wasn't even at Zanya. Sins of the kith. Let her filthy bloodline rot in the south. It will never hold a seat on the council." "Sounds like my reasons for dying is far nobler than yours for killing me." Casimir chuckled, but despite his apparent mirth, a rare note of fatalism crept into his tone, betraying a decision made. For a man like Casimir, preserving his own skin came a distant second to saving those of his friends. "You might want to think on that before you go bragging to your sister's ghost." "Casimir," Rosa's eyes didn't leave her opponent's sword, "I'm not agreeing to this." Not your decision, Rosa, he replied. Set down your blade. She swore under her breath and let it fall. But let's be clear. Casimir leaned close to Aska, his voice taking on a most un-Casimir-esque harshness. You're not done hearing ghosts. I'll make whatever pact the Raven demands. My Karaith will be back for your soul before my body's cold. It'll haunt you as only a restless spirit can, and you, my bitter little hag, will wish you'd never heard my name. Aska flinched. Her throat bobbed. Casimir straightened. His sword clattered to the ground. Are we doing this or not? It's not polite to keep a man waiting. A yelp sounded at the mouth of the alley. The thud of a falling body followed, and a choked scream close behind. Malachi's anger and shame bobbled away, replaced by giddy elation. Beside him, he felt Rosa tense as the Salaman fumbled for his sword. Casimir laughed and shook his head. Decided to join us, did you? Even bereft of armour, Victor Cadra cut an imposing figure in the confines of the passage. A head taller than Casimir, nearly 2 taller than Malachi himself, he radiated unconcern. A hearthguard dangled like a toy from one massive fist. The fellow squalled and struggled, though Victor seemed unaware he was even under attack. He cuffed his captive about the head and let the unconscious fellow fall atop his luckless companion. The black velvet of his cloak twitched at his heels. Some of us had duties. Aska Tarav's face went ashen grey. Of course she knew of Victor's reputation. It was a rare soul that didn't. The hero of Gathras Field, the man who slain the traitor Katia Trelan, the Council's champion. The last of Rosa's erstwhile opponents spun to face the new threat. Rosa dived for her sword. The Salaman started forward, hearthguards at his back. Aska set her sword point to Casimir's belly. Don't even think about it. Malachi pushed off the wall and flung his arm around Aska's shoulders. Impact knocked the sword from her hand and most of the breath from his body. The alley lurched. Then the strike of filthy cobbles sucked the rest of Malachi's breath away, but still he clung tight and weathered blows from elbows and boots as she fought to break loose. For the first moment since entering the alley, he wasn't useless. The moment passed, as all moments do, this one with an elbow to the gut that left him sucking for breath as commotion reigned about him. With a cry of triumph, Aska scrambled free on hands and knees. Vision blurring, Malachi crawled in pursuit. He tried not to think about what he was crawling through. As Aska's hand closed around her sword, he sprang. The blade hissed over his head, and for the second time that night they went down in a tangle of arms and legs. This time, Malachi ended up on top. A hand closed about the scruff of his collar, hauling him up and away. Easy, counsellor, said Victor. Her comrades have fled. She's had enough. Malachi hadn't the breath to reply. Enough. Casimir stalked down the alley. Of the sallow man and his 2 hearthguards there was no sign. Not nearly. He kicked Aska's sword out of reach and hoisted her upright. Trying to kill me, that's one thing, but threatening my friends... A hard shove sent Aska stumbling against the wall. Her eyes shone in defiance of Casimir's sword at her throat. Malachi had seen that look in the council chamber many times. She'd gambled and lost. Of course, it was a rare day when a councillor staked his or her life as she had. Let her go. To Malachi's surprise, the words were his. Casimir rounded on him, eyes ablaze. She tried to kill you. And she failed. The justification rang hollow in Malachi's ears, so he strove for a better one. Hand her over to the constabulary. She'll stand trial. Casimir shook his head. You believe that? Thundering boots heralded Rosa's return from deeper along the alley. Cheeks flushed from exertion, she stumbled to a halt. Lost them halfway to the Hyadra Grove. Could be anywhere by now. What did I miss? Victor folded his arms and propped a shoulder against the dray yard wall. Casimir's about to murder Lady Terev. Or maybe he isn't. You think I shouldn't? The harshness had returned to Casimir's voice. Would you? She'd already be dead. Malachi couldn't tell whether Victor was joking. His friend's face seldom gave away more than he wanted, and the old scar on his left cheek lent bleak mirth to most expressions. But we're talking about you. Do it or don't, hissed Aska. I'm not your toy. I'll not beg. She's right, Kaz. Rosa aimed a kick at one of the unconscious hearthguards. If we linger, someone's going to see something we'd rather they didn't. By Malachi's reckoning, that was 1 vote for Aska's death, 1 against, and whatever Victor's opinion was. Did he alone see that killing Aska would only worsen matters? But Casimir had the casting vote, and the sword, and a measure of wounded pride into the bargain. Appealing to that pride might achieve what reason would not. "She owes you an apology," Malachi muttered. Casimir's head dipped. He gave a weary snort. "She does, doesn't she?" The low rumble of Victor's laughter echoed along the alley. Rosa rolled her eyes. Malachi eased a sigh. Casimir's eyes met Aska's. "So which is it to be, Lady Terev? The apology or the sword?" She swallowed. I apologize." Casimir's sword twitched. A trickle of blood broke Aska's sin. "I apologize for naming Kalen Trelan a whore," he said. "That's how this started?" muttered Victor. Malachi nodded. "That's how it started." Victor grunted and withdrew. "I apologize for naming Kalen Trelan a whore." Aska's defiance gave way to a glare of pure venom. Casimir warmed to his theme. "And I see now that jealousy guarded my tongue more than any good sense." "And I see now that jealousy guided my tongue more than any good sense." Aska ground out the words from behind gritted teeth. Casimir leaned closer. "Now, take off your sword belt. Then you can go." Hans fumbled at the buckle. Belt and scabbard smacked to the ground. Casimir grinned and lowered his sword. "My thanks, Lady Terev, for a wonderful evening." Faced once again impassive, her shoulders set beneath a burden of fragile dignity, Aska shoved her way past Casimir. Victor's hand brought her to a halt. He stooped and whispered into her ear, speaking so softly that Malachi couldn't make out the words. Then Victor straightened, and Aska was on her way once more, if a touch more unsteady than before. "What did you tell her?" Rosa asked. "The price to be paid for another attempt." He shrugged. "I believe we reached an understanding." Laughing, Casimir reclaimed Aska's sword and scabbard and held both out to Malachi. "Here, a trophy well won, and reminded that you shouldn't walk the streets without one." Malachi hesitated and then took them. The sword fitted the scabbard to perfection, and the belt sat well enough at his waist. It felt strange, like he stepped back into an old life, one he'd been happy to leave. "So what happens now?" "Now," Victor said, "Casimir owes me a debt. He can make payment in ale." So there we go. That's chapter 4, Legacy of Ash. If you want more, it's available at the moment in Kindle and audiobook. And as soon as we hit 9th of April, there will be paperbacks everywhere, assuming you can find a bookshop that's going to ship one to you at the moment, which I'm sure isn't that hard. It's a great opportunity to support your local bookstores rather than the big ones. Yeah, they can use any help you can get at the moment. So, yes, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope the horrible nasal monotonous voice wasn't too bad and the voices weren't too stupid. In the meantime, please feel free to leave comments on this video. I will try and check in and answer any questions that you have. And thanks for watching.